Many men reach a point in life where they finally believe they've earned some peace. The children are grown, the career is behind them, the constant pressure to prove themselves has faded. For the first time in decades, they can wake up without rushing, spend money without asking permission, and make decisions based on what they actually want instead of what everyone else expects. Yet, it's often at this exact stage that many men make a decision that completely changes the direction of their remaining years. They meet someone new, feel a connection, and begin to wonder if marriage is the natural next step. Society encourages it, friends celebrate it, family members often support it, but very few people stop to ask an important question. Is marriage after 60 really the same thing it was at 30? What if the commitment that once brought stability can now create complications you never saw coming? What if the desire for companionship slowly turns into new responsibilities, new obligations, and new sacrifices at a stage of life when freedom has become your most valuable asset? Many men discover these realities only after they've signed legal documents, merged finances, and tied their future to another person. By then, reversing the decision becomes far more difficult than making it. This isn't about avoiding love, becoming cynical, or shutting people out. Love can be one of the most rewarding experiences at any age. The real question is whether marriage is necessary to experience that love. Over the years, relationship experts, financial planners, psychologists, and even family attorneys have noticed a pattern among older men who remarry. The challenges they face are often very different from what they expected when they first said yes. And the first reason may be the one that surprises most men the most. It has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with protecting the life you've spent decades building. The first thing many men worry about when considering remarriage after 60 is whether the relationship will work. But according to many financial experts, that's not the question they should be asking. The question they should be asking is what happens if it doesn't. By the time a man reaches his 60s, he has usually spent decades building something valuable. It may be a paid-off home, retirement savings, investments, a pension, or simply the comfort that comes from knowing his future is secure. Those things didn't appear overnight. They were built through years of sacrifice, discipline, and hard work. What many men fail to realize is that marriage instantly changes the legal relationship between their assets and another person. Love feels personal, but marriage is also a legal contract. The moment that contract is signed, new rules enter your life, whether you think about them or not. Suddenly, decisions involving property, inheritance, taxes, healthcare, and retirement can become far more complicated than they were before. A relationship that feels simple and exciting in the beginning may create financial consequences that last for years. The difficult part is that most people don't discuss these realities during the romantic phase. They talk about happiness, companionship, and future plans, but rarely about what happens if circumstances change. Relationship counselors often notice that older men enter second or third marriages with far more to lose than they had during their first marriage. At 30, a man may still be building his future. At 60, he is protecting it. That's a completely different situation. Yet, many approach it with the same mindset they had decades earlier. And financial concerns are only the beginning. What many men eventually discover is that money can be replaced. Personal freedom is much harder to recover once it's gone. If there's one thing that becomes increasingly valuable as men grow older, it's freedom. Not the kind of freedom people talk about in movies, but the simple freedom to live life on your own terms. Freedom to enjoy your routines, manage your time, spend your money how you choose, and create a peaceful environment without constantly negotiating every decision. After decades of responsibilities, many men finally arrive at a stage where life feels less demanding. That's why some relationship psychologists believe the greatest benefit of later life isn't romance. It's peace. The challenge is that remarriage often reintroduces obligations that many men thought they had already left behind. At first, everything feels exciting. There's companionship, affection, and the comfort of having someone beside you. But as the relationship settles into everyday life, expectations naturally begin to form. Decisions that were once simple now require discussion. Personal routines begin to change. Habits that brought comfort for years may suddenly become sources of disagreement. Neither person is necessarily wrong. The reality is that two individuals who have spent decades developing their own lifestyles are now attempting to merge those lifestyles together. What makes this even more difficult is that people tend to become more settled in their ways with age. A man who has enjoyed a certain routine for 20 years may find it surprisingly difficult to adjust. Likewise, his new spouse may feel equally attached to her own habits and preferences. Small disagreements that seem insignificant at first can slowly become recurring sources of tension. Many older men eventually realize they weren't actually missing marriage. They were missing connection. And those two things are not always the same. One of the most overlooked consequences of remarriage after 60 has very little to do with the couple themselves. It begins with the people already in their lives. Children, grandchildren, relatives, and long-established family relationships often become part of the equation, whether anyone intends them to or not. A man may believe he's making a personal decision that affects only him and his new partner, but family psychologists have observed that late-life marriages frequently create emotional ripples that extend far beyond the relationship itself. In many cases, adult children genuinely want their father to be happy. Yet happiness isn't always the emotion they feel when a new marriage enters the picture. Sometimes they worry about losing closeness. Sometimes they fear changes to inheritance plans. Other times they're uncertain about the intentions of someone they barely know. Even when nobody openly objects, tension can quietly develop beneath the surface. Family gatherings may feel different. Conversations may become guarded. Relationships that once felt effortless can suddenly require careful navigation. The situation becomes even more complex when both partners bring their own families into the relationship. Different traditions, expectations, loyalties, and histories begin sharing the same space. It's not uncommon for an older man to find himself caught between the people he has loved for decades and the person he has chosen to build a future with. What began as a search for companionship can unexpectedly place him in the role of mediator, trying to maintain harmony between worlds that don't naturally fit together. The difficult reality is that family conflict rarely starts with one dramatic event. It often grows through small misunderstandings that accumulate over time. And while many men assume these issues can be managed, there's another hidden challenge that can emerge later in the relationship, one that affects not only emotions and family dynamics, but daily life itself. Another reality that many men don't consider before remarrying is that relationships after 60 operate under very different conditions than relationships at 30 or 40. At a younger age, people often have decades ahead of them to recover from setbacks, adapt to changes, and rebuild when necessary. Later in life, those margins become smaller. Time feels more valuable. Energy becomes more limited. Health becomes less predictable. This changes the entire nature of commitment in ways that few people talk about openly. What begins as a relationship built on companionship can gradually evolve into something far more demanding. A partner who appears healthy and independent today may face significant health challenges 5 or 10 years from now. The same is true for you. Aging doesn't ask for permission, and it doesn't always follow a predictable timeline. Relationship experts frequently point out that when two people marry later in life, they aren't simply joining their present circumstances. They're also joining whatever future challenges may arise. Many men enter remarriage, imagining vacations, shared hobbies, relaxing evenings, and meaningful companionship. Those experiences certainly can happen, but life also has another side. Medical appointments become more common. Physical limitations can appear unexpectedly. Financial resources may need to stretch further than anticipated. Responsibilities that once seemed distant can suddenly become part of everyday life. The important point isn't that helping someone you love is a burden. Most good men willingly support people they care about. The question is whether you've honestly considered how much responsibility you're prepared to take on during a stage of life when your own well-being deserves attention too. Too often, men focus on the immediate emotional benefits of a relationship while overlooking the long-term realities that may follow. And this leads directly to perhaps the most important lesson of all. Because after decades of working, sacrificing, and carrying responsibilities, many men discover that the thing they value most isn't companionship, money, or even romance. It's something far simpler and far more precious: peace. By the time a man reaches his 60s, he has already spent most of his life chasing goals. He worked to build a career. He worked to provide for a family. He worked to create financial stability. He spent years solving problems, carrying responsibilities, and putting other people's needs ahead of his own. For many men, retirement or later life is supposed to be the season when all that pressure finally begins to fade. Yet, something interesting happens when they arrive there. They realize that the greatest reward isn't wealth, status, or even accomplishment. It's peace of mind. This is where many men make a critical mistake. They assume that because companionship feels good, marriage must be the best way to secure it. But relationship psychologists often point out that companionship and marriage are two completely different things. One is an emotional connection. The other is a legal, financial, and lifestyle commitment that affects nearly every part of your future. A man may desire closeness without realizing that what he truly values is independence combined with connection, not necessarily marriage itself. Many older men discover that some of their happiest years come when they have meaningful relationships without surrendering the freedom they've worked so hard to obtain. They can enjoy affection, conversation, travel, shared experiences, and emotional support while still maintaining control over their routines, finances, and personal choices. There is a difference between sharing your life with someone and restructuring your entire life around someone. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." This applies powerfully to the question of remarriage after 60. The time you have left is precious, and how you choose to spend it matters more than ever. Every day you spend in a relationship that drains your energy, complicates your life, or compromises your peace is a day you cannot get back. The Stoics understood that we must be ruthless protectors of our time and energy because they are our most valuable resources. When you consider remarriage, you are not just choosing a partner. You are choosing how you will spend the remaining years of your life. That decision deserves more than romantic idealism. It deserves clear-eyed wisdom. One reason so many men struggle with the question of remarriage after 60 is because they mistake loneliness for a need for marriage. At first glance, those two feelings can seem identical. Both create a desire for companionship. Both make a man miss having someone to talk to, share experiences with, or simply sit beside at the end of the day. But psychologists who study aging and relationships often emphasize that loneliness and marriage solve very different problems. Understanding that distinction can prevent a decision that changes the course of your later years. Loneliness is usually the absence of meaningful connection. Marriage, however, is a legal and emotional commitment that comes with responsibilities, expectations, and obligations. The problem is that when a man feels lonely, he may focus entirely on removing that discomfort as quickly as possible. During that process, it's easy to convince himself that marriage is the only path toward companionship. Yet many older men who remarry eventually discover that loneliness doesn't automatically disappear simply because another person lives in the same home. In fact, some relationship experts argue that loneliness inside a difficult relationship can feel even heavier than loneliness while living independently. Why? Because the expectation of connection exists, but the emotional fulfillment may not. A man can have someone sitting beside him every evening and still feel misunderstood, restricted, or emotionally disconnected. This is why many fulfilled older adults build strong friendships, social circles, hobbies, volunteer activities, travel groups, and meaningful relationships without rushing into marriage. They focus on creating a rich life first, and then allow companionship to become part of that life rather than the center of it. And once a man reaches that understanding, he begins to see something even more important. The happiest later life relationships often aren't built on dependency at all. They're built on choice, and that difference changes everything. Consider two men in their late 60s. Both lost long-term partners years ago. Both felt the same emptiness that often comes when a major chapter of life ends. The first man immediately began searching for another marriage because he believed a wife would restore the happiness he had lost. The second man took a different path. He rebuilt friendships, traveled more often, reconnected with old interests, improved his health, and gradually created a life that felt meaningful on its own. Years later, their experiences looked very different. The first man entered a marriage, expecting it to solve feelings that had little to do with marriage itself. At the beginning, everything felt exciting. There was companionship, attention, and the comfort of not being alone. But as everyday life settled in, new expectations emerged. Compromises became necessary, conflicts appeared, responsibilities increased. What he thought would bring freedom from loneliness slowly introduced pressures he had not anticipated. The second man eventually met someone, too. The difference was that he wasn't looking for someone to complete his life. He was looking for someone to share a life that already felt complete. Because of that, he approached relationships from a position of strength rather than need. He could enjoy companionship without feeling desperate to secure it through marriage. Relationship psychologists often notice this pattern. The healthiest relationships tend to emerge when two people choose each other freely, not when one person is trying to escape loneliness, fear, or uncertainty. When a man builds a fulfilling life first, he becomes less vulnerable to making decisions based solely on emotion. If marriage isn't always the answer after 60, what kind of future actually creates the greatest happiness, fulfillment, and peace during the years ahead? The answer may surprise many men. The men who seem happiest after 60 often surprise people. They aren't necessarily the wealthiest. They aren't always married. They aren't chasing approval or trying to prove anything. Instead, they have built a life centered around something many people overlook for most of their younger years: intentional living. They wake up with purpose, protect their energy, invest in relationships that bring them joy, and refuse to hand over their peace to situations that don't deserve it. When researchers examine life satisfaction among older adults, they consistently find that fulfillment comes less from marital status and more from the quality of a person's daily life. This is where many men experience a major shift in perspective. They stop asking, "How do I find someone?" and begin asking, "How do I create a life I genuinely enjoy?" That single change can transform everything. A man who enjoys his own company makes decisions differently. He is less likely to settle out of fear, less likely to ignore warning signs, less likely to enter commitments simply because society tells him he should. The reality is that remarriage after 60 can lead to happiness for some people. No serious expert would claim otherwise. But the happiest outcomes usually occur when the decision comes from genuine compatibility rather than loneliness, pressure, or the belief that marriage is required to live a meaningful life. The strongest relationships are often formed by two individuals who already know how to stand comfortably on their own. The Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is the core lesson for men considering remarriage after 60. Your happiness does not depend on finding someone to complete you. It depends on your ability to create a life of purpose, peace, and meaning on your own terms. A relationship can add to that life, but it should never become the foundation of it. When you build a solid foundation within yourself, you become less vulnerable to the fear of being alone, less likely to settle for less than you deserve, and more capable of choosing a partner who genuinely enhances your life rather than complicating it. The question is not whether you can find love. The question is whether that love will add peace or pressure. And that brings us to the final lesson. Because after everything we've discussed, there's one question every man should ask himself before making a decision that could affect the rest of his life. A question that cuts through emotion, excitement, and even love itself. Before any man remarries after 60, there is one question worth asking that may be more important than every legal document, financial calculation, or romantic promise combined. Does this relationship genuinely improve the life I've already built, or am I hoping it will fill something that's missing inside me? The answer requires complete honesty, because later life has a way of revealing truths that younger years often hide. By this stage, you've accumulated experience, wisdom, victories, disappointments, and lessons that took decades to learn. The greatest advantage of aging isn't knowledge, it's clarity. You begin to see which choices add peace to your life and which ones quietly take it away. Many men spend their younger years believing success means constantly adding more responsibilities, more achievements, more commitments. Yet after 60, the game changes. The wisest men often focus on protecting what matters most: their health, their freedom, their relationships with family and friends. their sense of purpose, their ability to wake up each morning feeling calm rather than burdened. When viewed through that lens, remarriage stops being a simple romantic decision and becomes a life decision. None of this means love should be avoided. In fact, companionship, affection, and emotional connection remain important at every age. The lesson is simply that marriage is not the only path to those things. A meaningful relationship can exist without sacrificing independence. A deep connection can thrive without creating unnecessary complications. The strongest later life relationships are often built on mutual respect, emotional maturity, and the freedom to choose each other every day rather than feeling obligated to stay together because of a legal contract. If a relationship brings greater peace, greater happiness, and greater fulfillment to your life, that's worth celebrating. But if it threatens the stability, freedom, and security you've spent decades creating, it's worth slowing down and thinking carefully before taking the next step. The goal isn't to avoid love. The goal is to make sure love serves your life rather than taking control of it. Seneca also wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future." This is the Stoic wisdom that can guide you in this decision. Do not marry out of fear of the future. Do not marry out of anxiety about being alone. Marry only if it brings you peace in the present. Marry only if it enhances the life you have already built. Because when you make decisions from a place of clarity rather than fear, you protect not only your assets and your freedom, but your very soul. Subscribe for more insights on relationships, human behavior, and the psychology behind life's biggest decisions. And I'd like to hear your opinion. Do you believe marriage after 60 still makes sense for most men, or is companionship without marriage the wiser choice? Let us know in the comments.